Jon Leonoudakis, welcome to the Baseball Bookshelf again.
Great to be with you, Ron.
So you've been a busy boy amidst all this thing. We spoke several years ago, and since then, I think your main project has been the series, which we can see behind you, The Sweet Spot, stories about baseball that are kind of reminiscent of things that you were active in with the Baseball Reliquary, which is a wonderful place to find oddball things about the game. And what are you
Well,
going to show us?
yeah, it's certainly one of the inspirations, but I think the major inspiration is this book,
Hmm.
because I'm a big fan, not only of this book, but a believer in oral histories. And when I started the Sweet Spot Project, I wanted it to be rooted in oral histories, one-on-one conversations with people deep inside the baseball subculture.
And how many of these have you done? You're available on Amazon Prime and Vimeo. And if I'm correct, there are 3 seasons worth of.
On, on Yes, the Amazon Prime, we have 3 seasons of content. But if you go to our Vimeo page, that's vimeo.com, the Sweet Spot on Demand. I should know the URL better. But that is a much deeper vein. There's a lot more stuff on there that there's a lot of hoops you have to jump through to get stuff on Amazon Prime, and I'm just not willing to do it. So there's a lot more material on the Vimeo site. And of course, I'm about to launch my Patreon site, which we'll talk about a little bit, which will give folks even greater access to me and my films.
So how many are there all told at this point?
I've done 30 films in 10 years.
That is a lot. And these are all
It is
about a half hour, would you say, or they
Oh, no,
vary?
no, no. They really range. It's kind of reflective of the times in which we live. A lot of folks don't have a lot of time. So I've got some that are short as 4 or 5 minutes. And then I've got my films like Not Exactly Cooperstown, that's just over an hour, and the Arnold Haino film, which is about 50 minutes. So it runs the gamut. I think our median is about 20 minutes.
Yeah, Not Exactly Cooperstown. That was about the Baseball Reliquary. And could you go into a little bit more detail about what the Baseball Reliquary is?
Sure. The Baseball Reliquary has been referred to in a couple of ways. Jim Bouton gave it a great term, the People's Hall of Fame. But what the Baseball Reliquary is, it's kind of an alternative look at baseball, its effect on American culture, society. It's almost like a humanities course about baseball rolled into a variety of perspectives that touch on art, literature, sport. It's one of those things that's a little bit hard to describe, which is why I made the film, because the Baseball Reliquary really needs to be experienced to be appreciated.
How would you compare that with the Society for American Baseball Research?
Well, I think, and I'm a member of, Hall of Fame, the SABR, and the Reliquary, and each of them offers something different. I think SABR is much more, I think their focus is a lot more on sort of statistics and numbers. They also do a wonderful job on their SABR biographies, which are terrific resources. And so the Reliquary really offers an alternative perspective, kind of a left coast perspective to baseball. It's very iconoclastic. They love the game reverentially, but not besottedly. They don't buy into the hot dogs and apple pie perception of the game that has been shoved down our throats for decades. They really look at the human side of the game, and that's what I find most appealing about them. And that has inspired the kind of work that I do, because I look at the human side of baseball, and those stories that I started to learn about from the Baseball Reliquary, those really appeal to me, and that's what makes the game fascinating. They focus on people who have impacted the landscape of the game, whether you're a fan or a writer or a former player or a manager. And I think that's the big distinction between SABR and the Hall of Fame. They really hit this gap that nobody really touches. and they do it in a magnificent way.
Now, I'm glad you brought that up because as I was leafing through some of the things that are available, you have uh, an episode about a bat boy, you have an episode about an artist, you have an episode about one of I don't know if founding fathers is the right word, but you call him the Rembrandt of baseball card photography.
Yes.
You have fans, you have female umpires. Uh, when I was looking on Vimeo, it looked like the third season, most of the episodes were devoted to women in baseball.
Yeah, that's right. Well, part of the mission of the Sweet Spot, which is, I should frame this up properly because this is a multimedia project in that we don't just make films, because we go out and we record oral histories, interviews with people. That also allows us to publish books. We can do audio books. We've already done one book. But to answer your question, part of our mission is to examine social issues in America through the lens of baseball, specifically racism, which we did with Mudcat Grant. There's an episode in the second season called Race Ball on the Inside Corner, with Jim Mudcat Grant giving us his perspective of growing up in the Jim Crow South and the racism he faced while going through Major League Baseball. He's funny, he thought, when I got to the major leagues, there will be no more discrimination. So of course that was completely wrong. But I got turned on to an organization called Baseball for All that is run by Justine Siegel, who's a bona fide baseball pioneer. And so we really wanted to focus on the issue of gender discrimination in this country. And one of the great things about baseball is that it's always been a reflection of American society, good or bad, whether it's issues with race, issues with labor, issues with gender, issues with the subculture of cheating in America that we had with the Houston Astros. So, but I think baseball is a great prism to look at these subjects in, because of course, when you're looking at gender discrimination in baseball, how women have been marginalized out of the game for over 100 years, and yet baseball is our national pastime. We're supposed to live in the greatest country in the world in terms of freedom and equality, yet that has just not been the case. The experience for American girls and women who couldn't even play Little League Baseball until 1974, and that was when they had to be sued by the National Organization of Women to allow girls to play baseball. So yes, that whole third season is dedicated entirely to that particular subject because I thought it was so important, and because there are deep, dark, tangled roots all around that particular issue. And so that's what that season was about.
It seems like you have a lot of fun doing this, but I imagine there's also a ton of work that goes into each one. And if you're doing so many over the course of so short a time span, how do you do that? And what kind of crew do you work with?
Number one, it's the greatest job I've ever had. To understand here, I have my own independent film studio where we finance, conceive, produce, and distribute our films by ourselves. We don't want any outside sponsors or big organizations attached to us that would color our perspective. And having done this now for the past 10 years, I've generated a nice little following, and people kind of appreciate that this is a very honest perspective. And so, my background is I've been a producer in the entertainment industry for over 30 years. So I know how to do things on the cheap, but make them look really, really good. And you talk about my crew size, typically it's me and one or sometimes maybe two people. When we go out and interview people, it's me and someone to handle the camera, the sound, and the lighting. And so we are a lean, mean fighting machine in that regard. But even though I've produced projects worth $20 million, I've also done the cheap and peppy stuff that you can make it look like $1 million. But I conceive everything. I curate the stories. We'll go out and shoot the stuff. Sometimes it's just me. And that's a tall order because, you've got to do everything, the tech side, as well as being able to ask the questions and be a good interviewer and all that kind of stuff. But sometimes I've had to do that, and I did that with well, we're going to talk about the film I'm about to come out with now with Greg Goosen. I did an episode of The Sweet Spot in the first season about one of the Dodgers' greatest fans. And it was just the two of us. And it was really an interesting dynamic because she and I were already friends. And sometimes in these interviews, people cry. And specifically when I asked them to hold a brand new baseball in their hand, I asked them, when you hold that ball in your hand, what does your heart and soul say? And 10% of them break down. It's a connection to my father who died. We took me to my first game, or this game means so much to me. This is a very evocative kind of moment for them. And so she broke down. But I don't know if she would have done that if it was me and a camera person she didn't know. Mm-hmm. So it's very dynamic, these types of experiences. But usually it's just me and one other person because I don't have a lot of money to hire a crew. But I own all my equipment just like any other film studio. And we've got our own edit bay here. You're in the Nerve Center. And so I work out of my house. So I keep the overhead low, and any money I make from the films, I plow back into the project. Because when I die, if I died tomorrow, I had 30 films about baseball that are very unique. I like to consider it an anthology because every story is original, new, and different.
All right, let's talk about Greg Goosen, because it leads me to one of the other questions: is where do you find these stories? Where do you find these people? How do you introduce yourself to some of these people when you say I want to do a story about you?
Well, I think like many other people who love baseball and have somewhat of an academic / scholarly bent, we read constantly. All I read are baseball books, and they're all over the house. I got them in the bathroom. I've got them on my nightstand because I feel like I'm behind. I need to absorb as much material as I can. And I'll go to symposiums. I'll go to conferences like the 9 conference in spring training or the Cooperstown one. And I'm there foraging. I'm looking for stories. I'm constantly taking, oh, that's a great story. I got to talk about that. Or that's something to explore. So I've been hoarding this stuff over the last 25 years. And so when, it struck me before I did the Sweet Spot, it was just kind of one at a time. What's a really good subject? All of us storytellers, whether you're a writer or a filmmaker, are always on the lookout for a great story. So when I come across them, and you come across it in social media, on Twitter or Facebook, you sort of drill down into that and say, that's really interesting. And nobody's really talked about this before. That's the other thing I learned when I did a lot of work with Walt Disney Imagineering over the years. And the big thing I learned from them, if you've got something to sell, you'd better make sure it's distinct. You'd better make sure it's unique and maybe something that hasn't been done before. And that's really kind of how I've approached these things. And so, over the years, I've developed relationships with people in baseball subculture. So if I want to reach out to someone that I want to do a story about, there's some sort of saying that you're just 2 phone calls away from anybody. And so, and I've always been a hustler and a go-getter in a very positive sense. So I've been able to find people through the web or people I know, what have you.
All right, so talk about Greg Goosen, because I always remember as a Mets fan, I remember, and you have a line in there from Casey Stengel when he was talking with writers, and he was talking about, this is Ed Kranepool. He's 20 years old, and in 10 years he has a chance to be a star. Here's Greg Goosen. He's 19. In 10 years he has a chance to be 29, which is one of my all-time favorite lines. But talk a little about who he was and why you did a story on him.
Well, first of all, I was a massive baseball nerd growing up. Baseball cards were my drug of choice. And I was a serious addict, and I had to have every baseball card I could get my hands on. So when I started collecting in 1965 when I was 7 years old. So I got Greg Goosen's baseball cards. And then when Bouton's book came out, Ball 4, in 1970, it was a seismic event because so many of those baseball players just jumped off of those cardboard slats and became human beings I could relate to. And they were funny. And Goosen was one of the funniest guys in the book. There are so many stories about him. And so I kind of knew that about him. But then, what happened was the Baseball Reliquary, it was going to induct Pete Rose into their Hall of Fame that they referred to as the Shrine of the Eternals. And it's a marvelous event that happens once a year. And but Rose was not available. He had a previous engagement. So Greg Goosen was his good friend. So Goosen shows up to accept for him. And he's like 6'5". He's dressed entirely in black with his crew cut. And he comes off as one of Humphrey Bogart's dead end kids with this streetwise charm. This is a guy that's been through baseball and, has had some incredible life experiences. And he just stole the show. He was absolutely hilarious. And, but he was also very tasteful and erudite in his discussion about the Pete Rose and why he's important and so on and so forth. So I was like, wow, that was really great. And then a few months later, the Reliquary staged this 40th anniversary of Ball 4. It was like a symposium. It was awesome. If you love Ball 4, boy, that was the day for you, because I think it started at 11 o'clock in the morning, went till 5 o'clock at night. And one of the panel discussions we had featured Jim Bouton, Tommy Davis, and Greg Goosen. And once again, Goosen stole the show. With his candor and his wit and his charm, he was hilarious. And so, it was funny at both events, because I was shooting the film, not exactly Cooperstown, about the Reliquary at the time. So my crew was covering the Shrine of the Eternals event. We were covering the Ball 4 turns 40 event with multiple cameras. And so I talked to Greg after the event. I said, I'm making the film about the Reliquary. Can I interview you for it? He said, sure. So this was, all of this, of course, happened in 2010. The Reliquary Ball 4 event was September 18th, 2010. And then I interviewed him, I think it was October the 6th. And it was just the two of us at his condominium. And it was a riot. And, I think he and I probably talked for 45 minutes or something. I could have sat for a week listening to his stories. He's such a great storyteller. And I could only use about 5 seconds of it for the Reliquary film, because we had all this other material to cover. But Terry Cannon and we loved him so much. We said, maybe we should give him an entire chapter in that movie. Not exactly Cooperstown, but it just didn't work out. And it always bothered me. I said, that was such a great interview. And so flash forward to this year, almost 10 years later, I was doing some research for another film I was working on an old hard drive. And here's the Greg Goosen interview, and I watched it. And I was absolutely floored. It was pure gold. And I said, so this has to be a film. The guy's been gone almost 10 years. Now, and that's the other thing to bring up was, after I interviewed Greg, 143 days later, he died of a heart attack at age 65. And it was a big shock to everybody who knew him and loved him. And when he died, I knew his brother Dan was a big boxing promoter based out of Los Angeles, and his office wasn't far from my house. So I put the whole interview together, put it on a DVD, and I brought it down to his office, and I left it with his secretary. And about an hour later, I got a phone call, and he said, you have no idea the meaning this interview has to our family. Greg never talked about his career as a big league ball player. He felt it was being boastful. And with the interview you've given us, we now get to hear those stories. We get to see him light up like a Christmas tree, the joy he recounts in recalling his time as a Major League Baseball player. So that was, encouraging to hear. But again, that happened in 2011. So I started to put this together, and working very, very closely with the Reliquary, because a lot of the material came from one of their events. And but so I wanted to present kind of a portrait of this fella, because he was far and away one of the greatest characters in baseball history. He was around from 65 to 70, Mets with Casey Stengel, played against Willie Mays, Bob Gibson, Juan Marichal, all of these people ended up ending up on the pilots, you know, the one-year wonders, with Jim Bouton just in time to be immortalized in his book. Then he goes to the Brewers, and then he ends up on the Senators with Ted Williams. So he's around for baseball through this really incredible historical section of baseball in the 1960s. And so his perspective as a player and a regular guy is remarkable. And so I think I was able to capture that.
I just want to, you mentioned Terry Cannon, who was the founder, I believe, of the Baseball Reliquary. Well, unfortunately, we lost him not too long ago, and he's probably worthy of a documentary just about him for his contributions to the game. You talk about being a hardcore fan from, like most of us who are watching these things or reading these books. What is it like? They always say you should never meet your heroes. Well, what was it like? You know, you have this idea of when you were growing up, oh, Greg Goosen, he's a major leaguer, he's a god. And then you meet these people. And what is that like? And have you ever met someone with whom you were really disappointed? And you don't have to mention names, but I'm just curious because I remember a TV show where this kid wanted to meet his hero, and it's the kind of thing. Oh, the father hears the guy backstage. Why do I have to do all this nonsense? That's probably in a baseball movie or two, or some sport movie. So tell us your experience about meeting some of these, if not heroes, these personalities.
I'll give you a great example. It's Jim Bouton.
Mm-hmm.
I had a phone conversation. I had some email exchanges with him, you know, a few years before I met him in person through the Baseball Reliquary. And he was kind of a jerk. You know, he had a little bit of a side to him that, you know, he could be that way sometimes. We're all human. But when the idea for the Ball 4 Turns 40 event originated with me, and I was already good friends with Terry Cannon. I said, hey, Terry, like a whole year before, I said, next year's the 40th anniversary. How about an event honoring and celebrating the book, and let's have Bouton come out. And hey, Tommy Davis is in town. We get him to come because that's a great idea. And so we did it. So the night before the event, I was invited to have dinner with Jim Bouton and Terry Cannon and his wife, Mary. And I was like, oh boy, you know, what's this going to be like? I hope, you know, you always hear that story because you could be disappointed. He was the exact opposite. He was charming. He was warm. He was friendly. He exceeded my expectations. And, you know, it was marvelous. And, you know, I can't say I think I've met somebody, or I was, you know, one of my films where I was going to interview someone and they turned out to be kind of a jerk or something. You know, this film I worked on called The Wrecking Crew, which was a very popular music documentary. We met a lot of people. And then there was one guy that was very, very, you know, big in the music business. He got his nose out of joint right before one of the interviews we were doing. But I mean, I've been fortunate. I have not experienced that kind of negative reaction to someone I had deemed as a hero or someone I looked up to. Goosen and Bouton, and Goosen in particular, just so exceeded my expectations, and they were already lofty because of how I'd seen him speak at these events. He was just a heck of a guy. And like I said, he's the kind of person I can just sit there for a week shooting the breeze with him. And it was just marvelous.
I want to go back to something you said about the experience when you give someone a baseball, that fan who got very emotional. You're involved in a project that works with people with Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, we'll talk about how the baseball ties in. And by the way, one of my films, which is on the Vimeo channel, it's called 108 Stitches. And basically what I did was I compiled a number of sections of interviews I did with people when they just hold that ball and they respond to it. And you just get this cross section of people, little leaguers, and then senior citizens up into their 90s. Very, very powerful. But a couple of years ago, I began leading a program called Baseballs, ALZ at the end of it, because a friend of mine who's a big ball four fan, Jerry Miller, had moved to Texas, and he said, hey, we're doing a program where we're using baseball as a means of therapy with people with memory care issues, with Alzheimer's and dementia. I said, that's a great idea. So I reached out to my SABR chapter member, our president. I said, can I start something like that up? Yeah, sure. So I created a partnership with a nonprofit called Alzheimer's Los Angeles, as well as the Veterans Administration. And the idea is that we, especially with the memory care folks, we treat this as a field of dreams. For example, they come in, everybody gets handed a magical baseball with 108 stitches on it. And that is our conduit to take us to our field of dreams. And we do the player introductions. Everybody gets to know each other briefly, and then we sing the national anthem. Music is very therapeutic for people with memory care issues. And then we go into kind of a show and tell piece where, we'll say, bring in a cherished baseball object of yours and just talk about it. And that's the big piece, is to enhance socialization and the cognitive skills. What happens is that people with dementia and Alzheimer's, they have a tendency to kind of clam up and fold up inside and not really connect or socialize with people. Here, our motto is, when you're talking baseball, you're creating community. And we create a welcoming space, a friendly space for people to come, as well as caregivers, to share their stories and love of baseball. And we've grown that to include a physical component before the pandemic, of course, where we would do soft toss with plastic balls, and then took it one step further to having batting practice with wiffle balls and wiffle bats. And you haven't lived until you've seen a 95-year-old person swing a bat. And I had 2 World War II veterans who were 95. And then one guy said, I haven't swung a bat in 75 years. It's like a bike. You don't forget how to swing a bat. These were guys on walkers, and the staff had to hold them up from the back of their seat or their back of their pants. So when they swung, they couldn't fall. And these guys were whacking that ball. So the benefits have been, people are connecting with each other. There's science that says when they engage in these types of activity, blood flows to the part of their brain that doesn't happen quite as much. And so they get these brief benefits from it. And so many of the caregivers have written to us saying, this program, my person they're not real communicative most of the time, but they're always asking, when is the next session? I can't wait. And when they come, they open up like a flower. And it's been very powerful. And it's also very beneficial with the Veterans Administration folks we work with, because these are people with a variety of maladies. They're on dialysis, they're missing limbs. Some of them have cognitive issues. And our program is a little bit different with them. It's much more presentational because so many of them have trouble communicating, but it's the same kind of thing. And we've also had them take batting practice because all those guys are in wheelchairs. We go to Dodger games. We've gone to UCLA baseball games. And so we've been doing it for 2 years now, and it's been a major home run. And so we're trying with SABR to get these programs set up at other communities around the United States. Sports reminiscence therapy in Scotland is massive. There's 250 sports reminiscence therapy programs. They focus on, of course, soccer, they do golf. Here in the United States, we have 9, which is disgraceful. We should be doing so much. We should be implementing programs like this to our seniors who I think, and especially the people with memory care issues, they are largely swept under the rug. Even my mother-in-law was at a place that was $5,000 a month, and she was in the cognitive care unit, and they basically shoved those people in front of a television. They didn't do a whole lot there wasn't a lot of stimulation for them. And I fear that's the case, not just here in the United States, but worldwide. This is a global issue.
Is there a presence on the web that people can go to find out more about these programs?
Yes, the chapter, the Rogers Hornsby chapter of SABR, they have a dedicated website, and I can get you that information so you can post it, Ron. We haven't yet set one up yet because we set up what they call it a group of interest within Sabre, and we just literally got that going over the last month or so. So hopefully in a few months we will have a website where people can go to learn more about it. But we've had wonderful media coverage. I did an interview with NPR. There was a terrific article that Bill Plaschke of the LA Times did on us last summer. And then that has led to people contacting me. I had a journalist from Madrid, Spain, so we did an interview with me. So there's an article about that in one of the most popular sporting periodicals in Spain. So we're just trying to get the word out, but there is no one specific site we can go to, but I can send you a link to the piece with the fellas in South Texas, because that's very comprehensive.
Which I will post when this goes up. Finally, I want to talk a little about, you talked about the 40th anniversary of Ball 4. This is the 50th anniversary of Ball 4, and you're involved in a program about that.
Yes. I'm struggling here about exactly which particular program that might be. I have my fingers in so many pots. You know, I was just made aware of that there's a new edition of the book that's going to come out, I think, in October, and it's going to include reminiscences from Jim Bouton's wife, Paula Kerman. Now, I'm not specifically involved with that, but you are correct when you talk about there is a Facebook page where we've been around for 5 years. It's called Ball 4 Freaks. And I decided, hey, it's the 50th anniversary. We've got to have a celebration. And so we're staging an online Zoom celebration event. We've got a keynote speaker. That is Mitchell Nathanson, who did the biography, a terrific biography, I might add, of Jim Bouton. And we are also going to have Charles Kapner, who is the foremost collector of Seattle Pilots memorabilia. And Charles grew up in Seattle and was about 9 or 10 years old at the time. So he's going to share his experiences of going to Pilots games that year in 1969. We're going to have a Seattle Pilots, or I should say more, it's a Ball 4 trivia quiz, and 2 of our members. And of course, I think, Ron, you're a member of the group. And so this is a very select, exclusive group. You have to pass a test to get in. It's a lot like the movie Diner, you know, where you've got, and just answering the questions is not enough. And we've got 215 people in there now. We also have Jim Bouton's son, Michael, who's a member of our community. So we've got kind of a personal tie there. And Michael said his sister Lori, who passed away, she would have loved this group. And it would have been great to have Lori with us too. But the people we attract, the people who are in that group, they know this book chapter and verse. They know the stories, and they're people with kind of a fun, irreverent sensibilities to them. And I try to keep it small, about 200, and because we've got another 200 people who want to get in. And just knowing the answers to the questions is not enough. You have to be vetted. So I go to your Facebook page and I see the kind of person you are. You know, the sort of political zealots, they're out. None of these crazy guys get in. So it's a very select company. We have a lot of very bright people who have written books, people who've made films, people who are broadcasters, average Joes. We all are united by the umbrella of Ball 4 and Jim Bouton, because to all of us who are in that group, that book had a seismic effect on us and our lives.
Jon, it's it's a fascinating time talking with you. You have your fingers in so many pies. I wish I had more time to talk about them. Everything you've done that I've seen has been a wonderful treat, and I wish you all the best out there in California on top of everything else that's going on. And look forward to your next project, and certainly looking forward to that Ball 4 celebration.
That's right. And once again, the Greg Goosen film will be available on Patreon. Well, probably in a week or so, I'll share the link to that as well with you.
I'm sorry, I just want to go back. You mentioned Patreon before. You want to go into that a little bit more before we leave?
Yeah. So Patreon, some people know about it, some people don't. Patreon, it kind of goes back to the old model of the patron-based system where fine artists were able to exist and live by the patrons that supported them, that believed in their work and wanted to, give them money to keep their work going. And part of that process was it created very special access, those patrons directly to the creator. So the Patreon model has been very, very successful. There are some people, that's how they make their living, whether people who create products, or they write books, or they're artists or filmmakers or what have you. A lot of them are getting by solely on the money they make from their patrons. And basically people pay a monthly stipend, if you will, to these creators, to allow them to continue doing their work. I mean, I've been doing this on my own for 10 years, financing it out of my own pocket. I just can't do it anymore. So, but I've developed enough of a following now around the world, because our Amazon stuff is seen in Germany, United Kingdom, United States, and Japan. People now say, well, I'd like to go to where can I go to? I'd like to go to a place where I can connect directly with the creator. It's kind of like I do a lot of public screenings at museums and libraries. We'll show the film, and then we'll have a Q&A session, and then I'll have a one-on-one contact with people who are there, and it's a much more personal experience. So really what you're doing with these Patreon pages is that you're creating access to people who enjoy your work and want to be a part of it. They're being brought into the inner circle, and they're getting to be able to connect with the creator one-on-one. And it's very exclusive access, and that's what Patreon provides.
Well, here's wishing you a lot of luck with that. And want to say, again, thanks for your time. Stay safe, and we'll be talking to you soon.
Thank you, Ron. I appreciate the time with you, as always.